She had always loved visiting small towns. There was something about the quiet streets, the simple stores, and the slow pace of life that made her feel at peace. That morning the sun was just rising over the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself as she stepped out of her car and walked toward the little fair that had set up near the town square. The air smelled faintly of fresh hay and baked bread, and children's laughter floated through the breeze. The fair was small but charming, filled with colorful tents, handmade crafts, and the kind of food stalls that seemed to have been there forever. She wandered from booth to booth, smiling at the friendly vendors, sampling tiny bites of pastries and enjoying the warmth of the sun on her face. She wasn't expecting anything extraordinary, just a quiet morning away from her usual routine, a chance to slow down and watch life move at its own pace. And then she saw him. He was leaning against a wooden fence near the edge of the fair, a figure that looked like he had stepped out of a different time. His clothes were simple, worn jeans, a faded shirt, and a leather hat that had clearly seen better days. But there was something about him that made him impossible to ignore. He had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but somehow pulled it in anyway. His boots were dusty, his hands rough from work, and yet his eyes held a calmness, a quiet depth that seemed unusual in a place so full of chatter and movement. She watched him for a moment, curious. He was tending to a horse, brushing it carefully, speaking softly to it as if it were the only person in the world who mattered. There was no hurry in his movements, no need to impress anyone. He just existed in his own space, entirely at ease with himself and the world around him. Curiosity nudged her forward. She walked closer, pretending to look at the horse, though she found herself more interested in him than the animal. He seems peaceful, she thought, almost to herself. She wasn't sure why she felt drawn to him. Maybe it was the way he moved, calm and deliberate, or maybe it was the loneliness she sensed beneath his steady exterior. There was something human about him, something raw and unpolished that made her heart feel light and heavy at the same time. "Morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up slowly, his eyes meeting hers. They were a striking shade of blue, clear and honest, with a hint of sadness lurking at the edges. For a moment, he just studied her, as if trying to figure out who she was and why she had come near. Then he nodded, a simple gesture, and returned to brushing the horse. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" She tried again, offering a smile. He glanced at the sky, then back at her. "Yeah, quiet days like this are rare," he said, his voice low and calm, not forced, not trying to charm anyone. "Just genuine," she smiled wider. "I like quiet days. They make you notice things you usually don't, like the sound of horses' hooves or the smell of fresh bread." He chuckled softly, a sound that was surprisingly warm. "That's true," he said, and for a moment they just stood there, taking in the calmness of the morning. There was no rush, no need to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. She liked that about him. There was honesty in the quiet, a kind of comfort that was rare to find. "Do you come here often?" she asked, curious. He shook his head. "Not really. Just passing through, you? I'm visiting for a few days. My work keeps me busy, and sometimes it's nice to get away even for a little while." She paused, then added, "I like small towns. People are simpler here, I guess. Friendlier." He nodded, brushing the horse one last time before stepping back. "People here are good, hard-working, honest. That counts for something, doesn't it?" "It does," she said, feeling a connection she didn't fully understand. It wasn't the conversation itself, but the way he spoke, the calm way he carried himself that made her heart feel lighter. There was a story behind those eyes, a story she couldn't quite read yet, but she wanted to. He tied the horse to the fence and turned toward her fully for the first time. "I don't usually talk much," he said, almost apologetically. "People assume I'm rude or distant, but I'm not. Just careful." "I like that," she said, smiling. "Careful is good. It means you notice things." He looked at her for a long moment, then shrugged lightly. "Maybe. Or maybe it means I've learned not to trust too easily." Something about those words made her heart skip. She could feel the weight behind them, a heaviness that wasn't just about being cautious, it was about having been hurt before. She wanted to know more, but she also didn't want to push. Some stories reveal themselves slowly, and she decided to let his unfold at its own pace. The morning went on, and they found themselves wandering through the fair together. She showed him her favorite stalls, the ones with handmade crafts and little trinkets. He listened quietly, asked a few questions, and even laughed softly when she bought a tiny figurine that she claimed would bring good luck. He didn't tease or mock. He simply watched her with a gentle curiosity, like he was seeing something new and fascinating in the way she noticed the little joys of life. At the food stalls, she bought 2 small pies and offered one to him. "Try this. Best apple pie in the county," she said. He accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." He took a bite and she watched his expression soften. "That's good," he admitted. "Really good." They walked to the edge of the fair where the grass met the dirt road, and she talked about her life. The work she did, the people she loved, the little things that made her days meaningful. He listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak, but really listening, his eyes focused on hers, his posture relaxed but attentive. There was a warmth in that attention, a sense of being seen that she hadn't realized she craved. In return, he shared small glimpses of his life. Nothing about wealth or power, nothing that could alarm or impress, just fragments. His love for the open land, his enjoyment of quiet mornings, and the freedom he felt when he was away from the eyes of others. He spoke with honesty, but carefully, like he was measuring his words, making sure they revealed enough without revealing too much. By the time the sun was high in the sky, and the fair was bustling with people, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Curiosity, warmth, and something else. A gentle pull, a connection she didn't fully understand. There was a quiet magic in the way he moved through the world, the way he observed it without forcing it to fit him, the way he seemed to carry his own story silently and with dignity. As they said goodbye that afternoon, she felt a pang of disappointment. She wanted to know more, to hear the full story behind those blue eyes, to understand the man who seemed both ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. He tipped his hat lightly. "It was nice meeting you," he said. His voice had that same calmness, the same honesty, and yet it carried a hint of something deeper, something unspoken. "You too," she replied, smiling. She watched him walk away, back to the trail where his horse waited, and she realized that she hadn't just met a wandering cowboy. She had met someone with a quiet strength, someone whose life clearly held more than met the eye, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of excitement about discovering a story that might change her life, or at least touch it in a way she hadn't expected. The day continued around her, but her mind kept returning to him, to the calm certainty in his gaze, to the quiet way he moved through the world. She wondered where he had come from, where he was going, and what stories he carried silently, hidden beneath the rugged exterior. She didn't know it yet, but this brief encounter would mark the beginning of a journey, a story of connection and discovery, one that neither of them could have predicted. And so, with the fair fading behind her and the sun warming her face, she drove back to her small rental cabin in town, her heart a little lighter, her curiosity a little sharper, and a new sense of anticipation blooming within her. The wandering cowboy, she realized, was far more than he seemed, and somehow, she had the feeling that their paths were meant to cross again. The days that followed were quiet, but filled with a restless curiosity. She couldn't stop thinking about him, the wandering cowboy whose calm presence had left an impression deeper than she expected. Every time she walked through the small town, her eyes searched the horizon, wondering if she would catch a glimpse of him again. She kept busy with her work at the local school, helping children learn to read and write. But even in the middle of a busy day, her mind would drift to the memory of his quiet smile and the way he had treated everyone with such simple kindness. One morning, she decided to take a walk along the trails outside of town. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wildflowers and dry grass, and the sound of distant cattle echoed softly over the hills. She moved slowly, enjoying the quiet, her thoughts wandering as freely as her steps. And then, as if fate had decided to answer her curiosity, she saw him again. He was leaning against a fence post, watching a group of horses graze in a nearby field. The sunlight caught his hair in a soft halo, and his posture was relaxed yet alert. He had the same calm air, but there was something else now, a faint trace of melancholy, a weight he carried quietly, almost invisibly. He didn't notice her at first, so she took a few steps closer, careful not to startle him. "Morning," she said softly, her voice blending with the gentle breeze. He turned slowly, and for a moment his expression was unreadable. Then recognition flickered in his eyes and a small, almost shy smile appeared. "Morning," he replied, his voice calm, as steady as the earth beneath their feet. She walked closer, holding her hands loosely at her sides. "I thought I might find you out here," she said, trying to sound casual, though her heart beat a little faster than usual. He shrugged lightly. "It's quiet out here. Easier to think." He paused, studying the field of horses. "And easier to be myself, I suppose." There was something in that statement that made her pause. She wanted to ask what he meant, to understand the story hidden behind his eyes, but she knew she had to be patient. People like him, she realized, didn't open up quickly. They revealed themselves slowly, one small truth at a time, like the sunrise gradually lighting up the sky. They walked together along the trail, moving side by side in silence for a while. There was a comfort in the quiet, a shared understanding that words weren't always necessary. She noticed how he observed the world, the way his eyes followed the flight of a bird, the way he paused to touch the rough bark of a tree, the way he seemed to carry the land in his gaze. He was not just present. He belonged to the land in a way that was rare, something older than time and deeper than most people could feel. Eventually, she broke the silence. "You really know your way around here," she said, nodding to the hills and trails. "Do you spend most of your time outdoors?" He smiled faintly. "I do, the land. It tells me things. It's honest. People aren't always that way." He glanced at her, a hint of something unspoken in his expression. "I like honesty." She nodded, feeling a spark of connection. "I like that too. There's something comforting about people who are straightforward, even if life makes them cautious." He looked at her for a moment, then turned back to the horizon. "Cautious is different from scared." "I'm not scared, just careful." She smiled softly, sensing the weight behind his words. There was a story there, a life lived with both freedom and restraint, and she wanted to understand it. But more than that, she wanted to know the man behind the quiet eyes, the one who had chosen solitude over the easy companionship of others. As they walked, they came across a small farmhouse that looked as if it had been there for generations. An elderly man was struggling to repair a fence, his movements slow but determined. Without a word, he walked over and offered his help. She watched as he worked beside the man, his hands steady and sure, guiding the older man when needed and handling the heavy wood with ease. There was no rush, no need for recognition, just the quiet satisfaction of helping another person. She felt a surge of admiration. "You really care about people, don't you?" she asked quietly. He shrugged again. "I suppose I do. Everyone needs help sometimes. Doesn't mean it gets noticed." But she noticed. She noticed the patience, the care, the respect in the way he treated the elderly man. It wasn't for show, it wasn't for gratitude or praise, it was simply who he was. That was part of what drew her to him. There was no pretense, no agenda, just a quiet goodness that seemed to exist naturally, almost instinctively. After a while, they moved on, the old man waving a grateful goodbye as they left. They continued down the trail until they reached a small creek, where the water flowed gently over smooth stones. She sat on a rock near the edge, dangling her feet in the cool water, and he crouched nearby, watching the current. "You spend a lot of time alone," she said after a moment, testing the waters of conversation. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the water. "I do. Most of the time it's easier. People complicate things." His voice was calm but carried a hint of sadness, as if each word was weighed carefully. She hesitated, then asked softly, "Have people hurt you?" He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, the silence stretching between them like the space of the wide open land. Then finally he spoke. "Yes, a long time ago. Enough that I learned it's safer to keep my distance." Her heart ached a little for him. There was a strength in his solitude, yes, but also a quiet loneliness that was hard to ignore. "I understand," she said gently. "Sometimes it's easier to be alone, to protect yourself, but it can also be lonely." He glanced at her then, his eyes softening slightly. "It is, but some things are worth the loneliness." "What things?" she asked, curiosity edging her voice. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched a small fish dart beneath the water, then shrugged. "The things that matter. The land, a good horse, a true friend. Moments when you feel alive, even if they're fleeting." She smiled, feeling a deep connection to the honesty in his words. It wasn't a story of grand gestures or dramatic events, it was a story of life itself, lived simply but with care. She realized she wanted to be part of those moments, to share in the quiet beauty of life as he saw it. They stayed by the creek until the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the trail. As they walked back toward town, their conversation grew lighter. They spoke of favorite foods, the books they enjoyed, the little things that made life enjoyable. He laughed softly at her stories, and she found herself laughing at his quiet humor. The bond between them grew subtly, naturally, like the slow unfurling of a flower in the morning sun. Back in town, they paused at the edge of the fairgrounds where they had first met. She felt a pang of reluctance, not wanting the day to end. "It's been nice," she said softly, "spending the day like this. I didn't expect, well, this." He smiled faintly, tipping his hat. "Neither did I. It's rare to meet someone who sees the world without rushing through it." She smiled back, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "Maybe the world needs more people like that," she said. "Maybe," he replied, his voice carrying a quiet honesty that made her heart ache and ache in a good way. As they said goodbye, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and curiosity. She didn't know much about him, only the glimpses he allowed her to see. But those glimpses were enough to make her wonder, enough to make her hope that she would see him again soon. And she had a feeling, a quiet certainty in the depths of her heart, that their paths were meant to cross many more times. That night, she sat on the small porch of her rental cabin, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear sky. She thought about the quiet strength of his hands, the calm depth of his gaze, the way he moved through the world with both care and solitude. She wondered what stories lay hidden beneath the surface, what memories had shaped him, and why he had chosen this quiet, wandering life. She didn't have the answers yet, but she felt a sense of anticipation, a curiosity that refused to be silenced. Life had a way of surprising people, of bringing them together in unexpected ways. And somehow she knew that meeting him was the beginning of something significant, a journey that would reveal truths about life, about love, and about the quiet strength hidden in even the most reserved hearts. With that thought, she finally went inside, closing the door behind her, her mind alive with possibilities. She didn't know the full story yet. She didn't know the secrets he carried or the life he had hidden from the world. But she did know one thing. She wanted to find out. And that desire, simple and human, would guide the days to come, as she and the wandering cowboy continued to cross paths in a world that was quietly waiting for their story to unfold. The next few days passed quietly, yet her thoughts were filled with him. Every small thing reminded her of their walks, their conversations by the creek, and the way he had quietly touched the lives of those around him. She found herself replaying the sound of his voice, the warmth in his eyes, and the calm strength he seemed to carry without effort. It was strange the way someone could feel so significant after so little time, but there was no denying the pull she felt toward him. She didn't know where he lived exactly, only that he wandered through the trails and hills surrounding the town. Some days she caught glimpses of him from a distance, watching him work with horses or helping the farmers repair fences. He seemed always busy, yet somehow always at ease. She admired that about him. In her world, everything was measured and planned, deadlines and responsibilities shaping every moment. But he moved with the rhythm of the land, patient and deliberate, and it made her wonder what life could be like if it were lived that way. One afternoon, curiosity and a sense of hope led her to follow a trail she hadn't explored before. The path wound through tall grasses and over gentle hills, the air filled with the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. She walked slowly, listening to the wind in the trees until she spotted him again. He was near a small wooden cabin tucked behind a cluster of trees, working quietly on a fence. His sleeves were rolled up and the sun glinted off the edges of his hat. He hadn't noticed her yet, and she felt a momentary thrill, as if she had stumbled into a secret world. "Hello?" she called softly, stepping onto the path. He looked up, and for a moment his expression was unreadable. Then recognition softened his features, and he gave a small, polite nod. "Hello," he said, his voice calm, steady as always. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, walking closer. I wanted to see where you spend your days." He studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the cabin. "It's nothing special," he said. "Just a place to rest. The work is outside." She smiled, sensing the humility in his words. There was no grand house, no hint of wealth, no effort to impress anyone. Just a simple cabin, built with care, surrounded by the land he moved through so naturally. She realized she liked that about him. the absence of pretension, the presence of authenticity. They walked together around the cabin, and she noticed small details. A carefully stacked pile of firewood, a few tools leaning against the walls, a garden with vegetables and herbs growing in neat rows. Everything was functional, practical, and yet somehow inviting. It reflected the man she had begun to know, quiet, careful, capable, and profoundly connected to the life he lived. As they sat on a small wooden bench outside the cabin, she asked, "Do you live here all the time?" He shook his head slowly. "I move around. I have places I need to be, people to check on, but this is home when I need it." His eyes were fixed on the horizon as if the land itself held memories and truths he hadn't spoken of. She noticed a flicker of sadness in him and hesitated before asking, Do you ever wish for more? For companionship, maybe?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, the quiet depth of his gaze carrying both understanding and distance. Then after a long pause he said, "I used to think so, a long time ago, but some things hurt too much to risk again." She felt a pang of empathy. She didn't know the details, but she sensed the weight of years spent guarding his heart. "I understand," she said softly. "It's hard to let someone in after being hurt. But it doesn't mean you have to be alone forever." He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw something shift in his eyes, a glimmer of vulnerability, carefully hidden beneath layers of caution. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Maybe it's possible." The conversation lingered in her mind long after they parted that day. She wondered what he had experienced, what events had shaped the man who moved through the world with such calm, such quiet strength. There was a story there hidden beneath the surface, and she wanted to know it not out of curiosity alone, but because she felt a genuine connection, a desire to understand the human being before her. The next morning, she returned to the same trail hoping to see him again. This time he was working with a group of farmhands helping them mend a broken fence. She watched from a distance, noticing the patience in his instructions, the careful attention to detail, and the quiet respect he showed toward each person. He didn't demand recognition or praise. He simply worked alongside them, guiding, supporting, and helping when needed. It struck her how different he was from people she had known in the past. He carried responsibility without arrogance, strength without aggression, and kindness without expectation. It was rare, she realized, to meet someone who lived so fully in the present, grounded in both action and thought, yet untouched by the need to impress others. She felt drawn to him not just by curiosity, but by admiration, and by something deeper, an unspoken recognition of his humanity. After the work was done, he walked over to her, wiping his hands on a rag. "You came back," he said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "I wanted to," she replied, smiling. "I like seeing this. The way you work, the way you help people, it's different from anything I've seen before." He shrugged, a small, self-deprecating motion. "It's just what I do. Nothing special." But it was special. She knew it even if he didn't see it that way. There was an honesty in his actions, a quiet integrity that made her heart beat faster. She wanted to understand more, to be part of the life he had shaped for himself, even if only for a short time. They walked together along the trail again, talking about small things, books they had read, meals they enjoyed, the subtle beauty of the changing seasons. Yet beneath the casual conversation, she felt the tension of unspoken truths. She wanted to ask more about his past, about the life he had lived before he became the quiet, wandering man she had come to know. But she also sensed that he would reveal only what he was ready to share, on his own terms. Later that day, she noticed a stack of papers sticking out from a small wooden box near the cabin. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she carefully glanced at them. What she saw took her breath away. There were legal documents, land deeds and contracts, evidence that the man she had thought was a simple wandering cowboy owned far more than she could have imagined. She stared at the papers, her mind racing, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a man living a quiet life in the hills. He had wealth, influence, and responsibilities that went far beyond anything he had shared. When he noticed her staring at the papers, his expression shifted from calm to guarded. "I see you found that," he said quietly. I didn't mean to pry," she said quickly, stepping back. "I was just curious about your life," he sighed, a sound that carried both resignation and relief. "Most people wouldn't understand," he said. They see what I have and assume they know everything. But they don't. They only see the surface. I don't want to judge, she said softly. I want to understand. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Maybe I can show you a little. Not everything. Just enough. Over the next hour, he told her fragments of his life, carefully chosen, gently shared. He spoke of responsibilities that came with owning large tracts of land, of the burden of managing people and resources, and of the decisions that weighed on him every day. Yet he spoke without pride or arrogance, only with honesty. She realized that his solitude wasn't just a choice. It was a shield, a way to protect himself from the expectations and judgments of the outside world. She listened intently, fascinated by the depth of his life, by the quiet complexity that he had kept hidden. He was a man of contrasts, strong yet gentle, private yet generous, powerful yet humble. She felt a growing respect and admiration for him, but also a tender concern for the loneliness she sensed beneath his calm exterior. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, she felt a strange mix of emotions, wonder, curiosity, and a growing sense of connection. She realized that the man she had thought was a wandering cowboy was far more than that. He was a man shaped by life's trials and responsibilities, a man who had learned to live with both solitude and care, and a man whose heart had been guarded for reasons she could only begin to imagine. As they parted that evening, he gave her a small, almost shy smile. "It's been good having you here today," he said. "It's been good for me too," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you for trusting me with part of your story." He nodded, tipping his hat, and she watched him walk back to the cabin, her heart full of questions, wonder, and a quiet hope that the days ahead would reveal even more. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that meeting him had changed something inside her. She had glimpsed a life of quiet strength, care, and hidden depth, and she wanted to be part of it. However much or little he allowed, that night, she lay in bed thinking about the man, the land, and the fragments of a life he had shared. She realized that there was more to him than anyone could see, more than words could capture, and she also realized that the bond between them, fragile and tentative, was beginning to grow, built on trust, respect, and the quiet understanding of two people who saw the world in similar ways. She didn't know all the answers yet. She didn't know why he had chosen solitude or what memories haunted him. But she did know that she wanted to find out, one small moment at a time. And in that desire she felt hope, a hope that would guide her through the days to come, as the story of the wandering cowboy and the woman who had noticed him continued to unfold. The days grew warmer, and the air carried the sweet smell of blooming flowers and freshly turned soil. She found herself walking the trails almost every morning, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, to share a few moments together, even if only in passing. It had become something she looked forward to, a small anchor in her otherwise ordinary life. Every encounter left her feeling lighter yet more curious. She wanted to know him, not the man others might see, but the one he allowed himself to be when no one else was watching. One morning, she found him by the creek again, kneeling in the shallow water to repair a small wooden trough for the horses. The sun glinted off the water, and the gentle sound of the flowing creek made the moment feel almost magical. When he noticed her, a faint smile curved his lips, and he waved her over. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft, blending with the sounds of nature around them. "Morning," he replied, standing and brushing his hands on a rag. "I didn't expect to see you so early." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, smiling. "I thought I'd take a walk before the day got too hot." He nodded thoughtfully. "It's peaceful in the morning. Things feel simpler before the day begins." She crouched beside him, watching as he worked on the wooden trough with steady, careful movements. There was something mesmerizing in the way he handled every piece of wood, every nail, as if even the smallest details mattered. She had seen him work before, but today it struck her differently. It wasn't just about helping the horses or fixing the trough. It was about the care he put into everything he did. There was patience and respect in his actions, a quiet acknowledgement that even the smallest tasks deserved attention. "You really pay attention to everything," she said softly, unable to hide her admiration. He glanced at her, a small flicker of surprise in his eyes. "I try," he said quietly. "It makes life better, I guess." She smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. It does. There's something comforting about watching someone who really cares about the world around them. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty but full of understanding. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever think about the past? About what brought you here?" He paused, his hands resting on his knees as he looked at the flowing water. "I do," he said quietly. "Sometimes the past is a weight. Sometimes it's a lesson. And sometimes it's a story I'm not ready to tell." She nodded, sensing the layers behind his words. She didn't press. Some stories revealed themselves slowly, like a flower opening with the morning sun. She wanted to be patient, to let him trust her enough to share, rather than forcing the truth from him. They stood and moved along the trail together, talking about lighter things, the changing seasons, the simple joys of life, the beauty of the open land. But underneath the casual conversation, she sensed a subtle shift in him. He seemed more relaxed, more willing to let her see glimpses of the man he had kept hidden. There was a softness in his eyes, a willingness to connect, that he had not shown before. As the afternoon sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the hills, he led her to a small wooden fence overlooking a field where horses grazed. He leaned against the fence and she sat beside him on the grass, the silence between them comfortable, almost intimate. "I've been thinking," he said finally, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "It's strange, meeting someone like you, someone who doesn't judge, someone who sees things clearly without needing explanations." She turned to him, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" He looked at her, his gaze steady, and for the first time she felt the weight of his loneliness and the hope he carried together. Most people, they see only what they want to see. They judge by what's on the surface. But you notice the small things, the quiet moments, the truth behind actions. It's rare. Her heart ached with a mix of admiration and concern. "I just see what's there," she said softly. "I think that's all anyone can do. Notice what's real, not what's pretending to be something else." He nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Maybe that's why I feel comfortable with you." She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a connection that was growing stronger with each shared moment. It wasn't about words or about the stories he hadn't told. It was about trust, about quiet understanding, about being seen without having to explain every part of yourself. Over the next few days, their bond deepened. They spent mornings walking the trails, afternoons tending to the horses, and evenings talking quietly as the sun set over the hills. She learned to read the subtle expressions on his face, to understand his moods without him needing to speak. And he, in turn, began to share more of himself, the small joys of life, the satisfaction of a job well done, the rare moments of humor he allowed himself to show. One afternoon, while they were repairing a broken fence together, she noticed something different in him. He paused, stepping back to examine the work they had done, and for a moment he seemed hesitant, almost vulnerable. "What is it?" she asked gently, sensing the shift. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "It's nothing," he said quickly. "Just thinking," she smiled softly. "You can tell me. You don't have to carry it all alone." He looked at her then, and she saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes, something he had not allowed her to see before. Finally he sighed, a sound that carried relief and a quiet trust. "I'm not used to letting anyone in," he admitted. "I've been alone for so long that it feels strange to have someone here who cares." Her heart softened. "It's okay," she said gently. "You don't have to be alone anymore. Not if you don't want to be." For the first time she saw him truly relax, the tension in his shoulders easing, the guarded expression melting into something warmer, something more human. It was a small breakthrough, but significant. He was beginning to trust her, to let her into a life he had kept private for years. That evening, they sat by the creek again, watching the water flow over smooth stones. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and the world seemed to hold its breath. She turned to him, curiosity and care mingling in her gaze. "Do you ever think about love?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his expression thoughtful, and for a moment she wasn't sure how he would respond. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "I haven't. Not in years. I thought it was a chapter I had closed. Life became responsibilities, work, and solitude. I didn't think there was room for anything else." Her heart ached for him. She reached out, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "Maybe there's room now," she said softly. Maybe it's never too late to let someone in. He met her gaze, the depth of his blue eyes reflecting a mixture of caution, hope, and something she couldn't name but felt in her chest. Maybe, he said quietly. Maybe it's time. Over the next few weeks, their days became intertwined. They shared meals, stories, and moments of quiet reflection. He introduced her to parts of the land she had never seen. The rolling hills, hidden groves, and quiet streams that seemed untouched by time. She in turn shared pieces of her life, her laughter, and her curiosity. They discovered a rhythm together, a dance of understanding and trust that grew stronger with each passing day. She noticed small changes in him as well. The guarded expression he had carried for years began to soften. He laughed more freely, allowed himself moments of joy, and even shared little personal stories that revealed the man behind the quiet exterior. She could see the loneliness lifting, replaced by a cautious hope, and it made her heart swell with a mixture of joy and tenderness. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the land, they sat together on a hill overlooking the fields. He took a deep breath as if gathering his courage, and looked at her with a quiet intensity. "You've changed things," he said softly. "Not in ways I can explain easily, but you've brought something back into my life I thought I had lost. Trust, connection, even, maybe hope." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just saw you." He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "And that was enough," he said quietly. That night, as she returned to her cabin, she felt a sense of closeness and anticipation she had never experienced before. The man who had seemed so distant and guarded was opening his heart, slowly, carefully, and she felt honored to be part of that process. She realized that their bond was no longer just curiosity or fascination. It was something deeper, built on trust, respect, and the quiet understanding of two people who had chosen, willingly, to see and be seen by one another. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: the wandering cowboy, the man who had once lived in solitude, was beginning to let love, trust, and connection into his life, and she would be there, patient and steadfast as his story unfolded, one careful, meaningful step at a time. The days that followed were filled with a quiet joy she had never expected. Every morning she found herself walking the trails hoping to see him, and every time she did, there was a sense of comfort in simply being near him. Their conversations became deeper, filled with shared thoughts, laughter, and the small details of life that made ordinary moments extraordinary. She had come to understand that his strength was not only in his hands or in the work he did, but in the way he carried himself through the world with patience, care, and a heart that had learned to survive. One morning, the sky was painted in soft shades of blue and gold, and the air smelled of fresh grass and wildflowers. She found him near the cabin, tending to a horse that had been injured slightly the day before. He moved with calm confidence, carefully checking the horse's leg and speaking in gentle tones. Watching him, she realized just how much of himself he gave quietly, without asking for anything in return. "You really have a way with them," she said softly, stepping closer. He glanced at her, a small smile touching his lips. "They trust honesty, and I try to give that." She watched him work, feeling a warmth in her chest. It wasn't just about the horses or the work. She was beginning to see the depth of the man he was. A man who had lived with solitude for years, carrying responsibilities no one could imagine, yet had not lost the ability to care. After tending to the horse, they walked together along a familiar trail. She had grown comfortable in his presence, yet there was still so much she did not know. Curiosity mingled with affection, a gentle tug that made her wonder about the hidden parts of his life. She wanted to know him fully, not just the man who walked the hills with quiet strength, but the man who had chosen isolation for so long. "Do you ever think about the life you left behind?" she asked, her voice gentle. He looked out over the rolling fields, the wind brushing his hair. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "There were responsibilities, decisions, things I thought I had to handle alone. But the truth is, I didn't want anyone involved. I didn't want to risk being hurt again." She nodded, sensing the weight of those words. "It's hard to trust after being hurt. I understand that. But sometimes opening your heart isn't just about risking pain. It's about allowing yourself to feel alive again." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of caution and something she couldn't name. Alive, yes. It's been a long time since I've felt that way, he admitted. That evening, as the sun began to set behind the hills, he invited her into the cabin. The interior was modest, simple, but warm. There were signs of his careful attention everywhere. Books neatly stacked on a shelf, a small table with a hand-carved surface, and photographs of the land he cared for so deeply. It was a place that reflected the man she had come to know, quiet, strong, and full of hidden depth. He offered her a seat and then began to share more of his story. Not the fragments he had revealed before, but a larger part of the life he had lived, the responsibilities he had carried, and the wealth and influence he had chosen to set aside for the simplicity of the hills. She listened with wide eyes, fascinated by the contrast between the man who had appeared so humble and the life he had built quietly, away from the world's attention. I don't like people knowing too much, he said finally after a long pause. It changes things. They see the wealth, the land, and they assume they understand, but they don't. Most people can't imagine living a life where you have everything but still feel empty. She reached out and gently touched his hand. I don't care about the wealth, she said softly. I care about you. Who you are, the way you see the world. That's what matters to me. For a long moment he looked at her, his eyes searching as if trying to measure her sincerity. Then slowly he nodded. Thank you, he said quietly. It's hard to find someone like that. The weeks turned into months and their bond grew stronger. They spent mornings exploring the hills, afternoons tending to the animals, and evenings sharing stories, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. She saw him begin to open up more, to share not just his actions but his thoughts, hopes, and fears. And he, in turn, noticed how her presence changed him, how he could laugh freely, relax completely, and even dream of a future that included someone else. One afternoon, while walking along a ridge that overlooked the valley, he stopped and turned to her. The wind tousled their hair, and the sunlight danced across the fields below. I never thought I'd feel this way again, he said quietly. About trusting someone, about letting someone in, about love. Her heart skipped a beat. I'm glad, she said softly. You deserve it. You've waited long enough. He looked at her, the depth of his gaze carrying a mixture of relief, vulnerability, and hope. I didn't realize how lonely I had been until now, he admitted. I didn't think I could feel like this again. But you've shown me it's possible. Tears sprang to her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming sense of connection. It's not too late, she said gently. It's never too late to love or be loved. That evening they returned to the cabin where he had prepared a simple meal. They ate together, sharing stories and laughter, and she felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people choosing to be together step by step, heart by heart. Over the next few days, he introduced her to parts of his world she had never seen. He showed her the lands he had quietly managed, the communities he had supported, and the projects he had undertaken without seeking recognition. She saw the quiet generosity of a man who had lived with both power and solitude, and it made her admire him even more. One afternoon, while sitting beneath a large oak tree, she asked, Have you ever considered sharing this part of your life with others? He shook his head. No, people don't understand. They see what they want to see and assume they know everything. I've learned it's safer to stay quiet. But you don't have to stay quiet with me, she said softly. I want to see the real you, not the parts you think people expect. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a glimmer of vulnerability mixed with gratitude. Maybe I can try, he said quietly. As the weeks passed, they continued to grow closer. He shared more of his story, and she shared her life as well. Together they laughed, worked, explored, and simply existed in each other's presence. The walls he had built over the years began to crumble, replaced by trust, understanding, and a love that grew slowly but steadily. One evening, under a sky full of stars, he took her hands in his. I never thought I'd find someone like you, he said softly. Someone who sees me, truly sees me, and still chooses to stay. You've brought warmth back into a life I thought was too cold for love. She smiled, her heart full. And you've shown me that people can change, that hearts can open, and that life can surprise us when we least expect it. He pulled her close, and for the first time, They shared a quiet embrace that spoke louder than words ever could. In that moment, the years of solitude, pain, and caution melted away, replaced by trust, hope, and a love that had been patiently waiting to be discovered. The days turned into months, and their bond became unbreakable. He began to share more of his life with the world, carefully, selectively, but always with honesty. She stood by his side as he balanced his responsibilities with the simple joys of their shared life. Together, they built a life that was grounded in trust, respect, and the quiet understanding that had first drawn them together. She realized that the man she had thought was just a wandering cowboy was so much more. He was a man who had faced pain and solitude, who had carried responsibilities most people could never imagine, and who had finally learned to open his heart again. And she, through patience, kindness, and genuine curiosity, had become part of that journey. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, painting the sky in soft gold, she watched him work with the horses, his movements calm and deliberate. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had allowed her into his life, and that together, they had discovered a love that was real, grounded, and enduring. He looked at her, a small smile on his lips, and she returned it, feeling a connection that had grown from curiosity and admiration into something profound. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," he replied, his eyes warm, steady, and full of trust. As they walked along the trail together, the world around them seemed to hold its breath, honoring the quiet beauty of a life rebuilt, a heart opened, and a love finally allowed to bloom. They had both waited, both guarded, and both learned that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are the ones written in simple moments, shared laughter, and the quiet strength of two people choosing each other every single day. And in that choice, they found not just love, but a life full of hope, connection, and the understanding that true happiness often comes quietly, patiently, and unexpectedly, just as it had for them.